right. We know it's the middle of a school day, so we're really appreciative of all of you who are able to make it. We're really honored to have Joe McDonough, one of our own partner school principals, joining us, or I'm sorry, hosting this really just to give us a taste of P2 for educators. He's going to walk us through one of the sessions that he has created himself and also used with his own staff. So we're really excited for you all to experience it. I'm going to just give it over to him so we can respect the time and enjoy. Before that, I'm so sorry. We do have the chat box open. If any questions arise or something comes up, please feel free to participate. We'd love to have this as interactive as possible. All right, Joe.
Great. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you for giving up a little bit of your day to be here with us. I just want to ask you to bear with me. My voice is a little bit shaky. I'm getting over a nice holiday cold, so I think we'll be able to make it through the discussion. So what we're going to do today is take a look at the P2 for Educators presentation, Celebrate What's Right. And my hope for the day is that this is sort of a twofold presentation. One is to just go through the content of Celebrate What's Right, which I think in and of itself is incredibly useful for this time of year. And then two, I'm hoping to interject or help answer questions about P2 for educators in general. So it'll be a little bit of both. I'm also hoping that you've had the opportunity to view the TED Talk by DeWitt Jones. If you didn't have a chance to do that before, I think the presentation will still make a lot of sense, but I would very much encourage you to go back and watch the TED Talk afterwards to help sort of tie some loose ends together for you. So what we're doing today is just taking a chance at the new year to consider how we choose to see our circumstances and what that choice does to impact our work as educators and impact our schools. And just as a reminder, before we really get into it, we have to remember that the Positivity Project is based on positive psychology. It has its roots in positive psychology, which focuses on what's right rather than what is wrong. So a common definition that I like to use here on the slide is it's the study of ordinary human strengths and what goes right in life. Its interest is in discovering what works, what is right, and what is improving. So traditional psychology was really focused on improving pathologies. If there were problems, there were strategies and various therapies that could help people get back to sort of a baseline. Positive psychology is interested in, if there's a number scale between 1 and 10, and you would self-report at a 5, positive psychology is about trying to get you from a 5 to a 7 or an 8. It's not about kind of looking at what's wrong and fixing what's wrong. It's about finding what's right and making it better. This is my favorite quote from the DeWitt Jones TED Talk and from Celebrate What's Right. So by celebrating what's right with the world, we find the energy to fix what's wrong. And I should have said before I got started, I'm really hoping that if people have questions or if I ask some questions that people find some bravery to participate on the recorded Zoom, because it will really add to the richness of our discussion. I know it's easier when we're in person, but that will very much help as we go along. If I were doing a typical P2 for educators session in person with my faculty or with another group of teachers, there'd be moments in this presentation where I'd be splitting people into small groups. They'd be talking and then sharing out with the group, sometimes just doing a whole group discussion. So the feel of a P2 for educators would be slightly different than what we're doing today, but I think you'll get the gist. So as we look at this quote, does this strike anybody, or did it strike anybody during the TED Talk? Does anybody have any thoughts that they'd like to share about DeWitt's words here? It's okay if you don't. I'm just waiting an appropriate amount of time for the bravery to build. Okay, so one thing that I'd like to point out about this quote is that when we're celebrating what's right, we're not just looking at the positive. We're doing that in an effort to build energy and build a reserve of strength to then fix what's wrong. So I think one common misunderstanding of positive psychology and the Positivity Project potentially as an objection is that people may conflate positive psychology with toxic positivity, which would be trying to tell everybody that things are just great all the time. That's a message that's not going to go well in schools. If you're a leader or if you're a teacher working with your colleagues and you're just trying to say everything's great, there's nothing wrong here. In my experience as a teacher and an educator, that's not the right message. What is the right message is saying, if we focus on what is going well, if we celebrate the good things and develop a lens to see the good instead of just being hyper-focused on what's wrong, it actually gives us a greater ability to address the things that we know we need to change. So up front, I think that is sort of the foundational message of what DeWitt Jones is saying and what I'd like you to sort of carry with you as we go through the rest of the slides. Any thoughts before we move on?
So, Joe, we had a few people in the chat just kind of, agreeing, saying that beauty can be found from multiple angles, remembering that the glass is half full, can be refilled. We tend to do it with a better attitude. And it can be overwhelming if you just focus on the negative. So lots of action happening on the chat. If anyone wants to jump in, please feel free.
Yeah, any point, feel free to jump in. So that's great. That's a great start. And those comments are all going to tie into what we're looking at down the road here. So we're not going to watch the presentation together.
Joe?
Yes.
I'm sorry, this is Lisa Sargent from
Hi.
Ogdensburg. Hi, I had a quick question about this before you go any further, and maybe you're going to address this, but as P2 building leaders, do we ever, do we step in and address our staff as coworkers? Do we kind of share some of this stuff with them? Because as of this point in the year, most of my work has been to support my teachers with what they do in the classroom. But there are lots of days that I feel that my teachers need as much support as our students do.
I think you're 100% right. And it's really why we have developed P2 for educators. It's exactly to address that.
Okay.
I could go on for a really long time about that, and I won't, so I'll try to keep it succinct. But my belief is that we need to take care of, as leaders, and I know there are probably principals and teachers and counselors and all kinds of school people on this, but for school leaders, we need to be taking care of our faculty and staff and helping create an environment and modeling all the things that we're about to talk about this afternoon so that they are better able then to do the same for students. So I think what you'll find as P2 kind of grows and matures in your school is that it goes from being something that might be 15 minutes a day between teachers and students to something that can be sort of foundational and throughout the whole organization, so that colleagues use that terminology. The principal does things in faculty meetings, like little snippets of a P2 for educators. So I think you're right, perfectly right to be asking that question.
Okay, thank you.
Can I piggyback on that a little bit?
Sure.
Lauren Morley from Hammond Central. I actually sent this video out. I do a daily update, and I sent this out this morning and have already gotten 5 faculty members that have emailed me back. Thank you so much. And I reached out to our DTST. Many of our local districts anyway in the North Country have a DTST team where I think they can kind of collaborate together with things like this to, like you said, it's a culture. If you can build it as a part of your school culture, it's inherent and it's just how we are. And I think that's so critical and so crucial. So it's great. And it's good for this week's optimism as being a theme. So thank you so much for sharing this, because it definitely links everything together.
Absolutely. Thank you. So as we keep looking here, DeWitt shares a quote: "Our vision controls our perception, and our perception becomes our reality." And I've watched the TED Talk a lot of times, so I can sort of remember all the context of the quotes. And this is a quote that could be a little bit complicated on the surface, but you have to think about what he says right before it. And he's talking about how he was a photographer at National Geographic, and he said the Geographic had a vision. And he defines the vision as they charged him with going out in the world and taking pictures to celebrate what was right. So it's a vision in the sense of a mission or a core belief. It's not vision in the sense of what you're seeing. So I just did this P2 for Educators presentation for the faculty at my district. People from all 3 buildings came. And we talked about this quote for a little while. And I asked people to think, how does this relate to the work we do? How could what you have as a vision, are you holding something up as your vision, your core belief, or your mission? And how does that affect perception? And does that perception become your reality? Does anybody have any thoughts on that? I don't want to monopolize all the talking with my weak voice. So if your vision of as DeWitt Jones is to celebrate what's right, that core belief or that vision, as he says, informs what you're looking for. So if you have a negative vision for your work as an educator, which you're probably not choosing, but if it has over time become that, it will start changing how you perceive your work. If you have a vision that says like, it's only Wednesday, I got to get through a couple more days, or man, I got 12 more years before I can retire, that becomes a vision, whether you're sort of holding it up like that or not, that affects how you perceive your work. And then that becomes your reality of your day-to-day in school. So collectively, what that looks like is what Lauren just commented on. It's a culture issue. So everybody's vision, if they're all independent and up to changing over time based on all their individual experiences, that affects the collective culture of the school. So what we need to do is celebrate what's right. We need to hold up these beliefs as school leaders, and we need to use the Positivity Project in every way that we can to sort of influence the culture to be more unified and focused on what we've learned from positive psychology gives people the strength to handle adversity. There are several examples of this in his photography, and we'll look at one right now. Hopefully this struck people as you watch the TED Talk. So during this portion of the TED Talk, he shows these 2 images, and he's talking about how there's always more than one right answer. So if you remember right, this little canyon or this little cave, it's the same cave from a different perspective. And so when you look at the one on the left side of the screen, it looks a little bit desolate. It could look a little scary even. You'd be kind of curious as to what's down there. If you're looking at it in terms of art, in terms of his photography, the one on the left's it could be considered a little bland. The one on the right is captivating. It's beautiful. It's awe-inspiring. And it's literally the same thing. It all depends on how it's being looked at. So how can that concept, there's more than one right answer, which is DeWitt Jones saying there's always more than one way to look at a situation. How can that impact your work in schools?
I think being open to more than one right answer allows you to approach things from different angles and be models for the students that
Absolutely.
There's definitely more than one way, more than one answer, and that different things can be important or beautiful to different people.
Absolutely. And, ironically, there's more than one right answer to this question that I've asked. Teachers yesterday talked about, I had an English teacher talk about how, often she'll ask a question about a book that they're reading, and it will seem like a student's going off on a tangent. And it could be tempting to shut a student off. But if you wait and listen and then maybe ask a follow-up question, you see that they're just thinking about it differently. So that's a really tangible example of how you could use this in school. Another thing that we talked about was how we view our students as teachers. Sometimes there are students that we find more challenging than others, but could we be looking at that person differently? Could we be learning more about the person? Could forming an authentic relationship based on something in his or her life outside of school make a difference so that you can see the canyon on the right and see the light coming through and see the beauty that's there? So it's really, you'll hear a lot of points throughout this hour or however long we talk that really center on perspective, perspective taking, and a shift in your lens to change not just how you see it, but change how you're actually experiencing it. DeWitt goes on to talk about how there's always more than one right answer. And he says, you begin to find more and more of them. You just get more and more comfortable with reframing obstacles into opportunities. So the key on this slide is that last sentence, the idea of reframing obstacles into opportunities. And this is something that I've worked with my middle school faculty and staff on. I've used this DeWitt Jones for a couple of years. And I don't know if anybody's noticed, but the last couple of years in school have been mildly challenging. There are a lot of obstacles that have gotten in our way. And so you can just keep it like that. And you can just keep them as obstacles, or you can say, as we're beginning to move forward, what opportunities have we found as a result of that? What did we learn? How did we grow? Yesterday, we talked about, when do we grow as human beings? And everybody came up with fabulous examples, essentially saying we grow when things are hard. Like we grow through hardship, we grow through difficult lessons. On a physical level, when we work out, it's difficult, it's challenging our muscles. I'm certainly not a biologist, but my understanding is you're breaking down muscle fibers when you work out, and those heal, and they heal stronger. So the idea of growth from difficulty rather than difficulty weighing you down. Both options are there, equally present for people to take. And we'll find as we talk more, and I think you can find from your own experiences, that choosing the growth option just leads us to where we want to be in school. One of my favorite scenes in the TED Talk is when DeWitt Jones talks about the puffballs. And hopefully people remember that portion of his talk and remember some of the photography. And he says, I wanted dandelions and I had puffballs. And I'm just about to leave when this little voice in my head says, DeWitt, what's here to celebrate? What's right with the situation? I find that tremendously relatable from when I was teaching and from my years as a principal. There are times when you want something to be a certain way and it just isn't, right? Or worse, it's the complete opposite of what you wanted. It's not an uncommon experience. And so DeWitt had that happen. He's in British Columbia. He had seen this field of dandelions, and he said, I'll come back and get those, and they were gone. So a couple lessons there. One is he probably should have seized the moment when he had it. And he admits that he sort of let that opportunity go. But does anybody recall what he does with the puffballs? What's the sort of lens shift that happens? I'm not giving up asking for questions.
He gets underneath it and puts it between him and the sun.
Yeah, it's absolutely gorgeous. He was like, DeWitt Jones is like, I had puffballs. There's puffballs everywhere. I'm above the puffballs, below the puffballs. And it's a really concrete example of taking what could have been perceived as a negative situation. And here we see an amazing, beautiful photograph of what could just be considered as like a weed past its prime, right? So it's about how we look at it and what we choose to do with it. Now, I mean, this is a little bit comical and it's intended in the most empathetic, compassionate, loving way possible. But we talked about how sometimes we can feel like the people that we're working with, students that we have, or even colleagues, like you may see puffballs occasionally. You may see something, you may have an experience of this isn't what I wanted. These students aren't doing what I wanted, right? Or this student's not behaving in the way that I want. But we need to challenge ourselves to use a different lens and to consider what sort of, I'm using the word beauty a lot because I'm looking at the photograph, but, you know, inner beauty or what character strengths or what sort of gifts our students have to share, even though they may not all be the same. Any sort of last thoughts about the puffballs?
Yeah, I don't know if I'm just jumping in here, but
Yeah.
this was my favorite part of the whole talk because it is a complete shift in perspective. It is beautiful. And I think sometimes we look at dandelions or even the puffballs as just
Right.
annoyances and they're in the way. And why can't they just be nice green grass? But there's just so much there. And I just loved that.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just such a great visual. If you do this presentation with your faculty, or if you're a teacher and you're sharing it with a team, or if you're just doing it, you know, by yourself, this image after you've done the presentation, I usually share it out with the faculty, and it just becomes a touchstone. It becomes something that sort of instantly reminds you of all of the concepts that we're talking about. So I would really encourage you to use this photo. I had a teacher a couple of years ago. I may have seen her name enter into the room, so she'll know, that put this puffball on her Apple Watch so that she saw it all the time when she looked at what time it was. And so those little things are useful for your staff or for yourself, just to sort of keep that mindset alive, because it's very easy to let it go.
That's funny, Joe. I was going to share that I use that as my.
I saw your name pop in there. It was like, I wasn't going to call you out, but
Yeah, it's okay. It did mean something.
yeah, absolutely. Thanks.
You'll have it.
Ironically, I feel like when I was a kid, and I've done this with my children, we used to pick them and make a wish and then blow.
Yeah,
Which I feel like could be an extension of the next picture, where, you know, you see the puffball, you see the beautiful light, you make your wish, and then you
Right.
put that wish into the universe, right? So whatever you project out, kind of the same thing that we're talking about, whatever you put into the universe, you tend to get back. Positivity, negativity, those
Absolutely.
perspectives. If you continue to push that out, hopefully in a positive way, it's a good thing. So when I see it, I also have that childhood memory of, okay, now I make my wish.
Yeah.
Well,
definitely. And I had a teacher comment that what makes this beautiful is the light shining through, and that the light needs to come from someplace. And we have students that need that light, and it really is us, you know, particularly in our school setting. So there's a lot of ways that you can look at it, but it's a wonderful image to keep in our minds. Anything else before we move? So he says, change your lens. Celebrating what's right is not a perspective that denies the very real pain and suffering that exists on this planet. Rather, it's a perspective that puts those problems into a larger, more balanced context, a context where we can see that there's far more right with the world than there is wrong with it. And there's a lot to unpack there. Did that quote strike anybody in terms of what we do in schools? Before I comment.
I have one thing, Joe.
Yes.
Internally at P2, we often will say, you know, sometimes we can be associated with toxic positivity,
Yes.
wrongfully so. And we often will say we're really the antithesis of that.
Right.
Like we really work to acknowledge adversity and just look through a different lens, as this kind of speaks to. So it reminds me of that.
Awesome. Thank you, Melissa. Yeah, so like the original quote, and it's sort of in this quote, that it gives us the energy to deal with the things that we find to be challenging, the negative, the adverse, all those things that happen on a daily basis. It's part of life on our planet. A key that I want to pull out of this, there's two. One is that you're putting the negative into a broader perspective. So that's perspective taking in general. When you have, say you're a middle school English teacher and you have 100 students, you may have a handful of students that are either having a very difficult time academically, they're challenging behaviorally. I don't need to give more examples. Everybody here knows what I'm saying, but that could be like 6 students out of 100. And my experience has been that as school people, even as teams or in meetings, we tend to focus on that in a disproportionate way to the rest of the students. You know, if it's 6 out of 100, it's 6% and there's 94%. It doesn't mean that you don't give lots of time and energy and they don't deserve every single thing that we have to pour into making their education better. But if you only focus on what's difficult for you or what could be perceived as negative or what's challenging, you lose sight and you start taking for granted all the good. The second point that I like to pull out is the end of what DeWitt says is that there's far more right in the world than there is wrong with it. And keeping with that same example, if you have 94 out of 100 students that are sort of doing a good job, so to speak, that deserves some of your attention. It deserves your attention for so many reasons. The students deserve your attention so that they don't feel like they're being taken for granted. They need your gratitude. You need to give that attention so that you feel good about what you're doing. When we take things for granted and we just focus on the negative, it's sort of like a net loss in our energy and our overall well-being, and then we have less to give. So that's why this mindset shift is so important. Any thoughts about that, or any experiences? Can people draw on their work to sort of validate that or maybe challenge that?
So this is Lisa again, and I'm sorry I'm talking, but because I believe in all of this so much. My concern though is that sometimes teachers, we are put in positions of intense pressure because the 6 kids didn't do well.
Yes.
And then that becomes the focus, not because we chose that focus, but somebody above us chose that focus.
Mm-hmm.
And that snowball effect occurs, and there's just considerable stress. Any words of wisdom for me to help my staff kind of tweak that?
Sure. So are we talking mainly academic when you're talking about that type of thing?
Yes, a lot of it. For instance, I'm working right now. I'm a special ed teacher, and I push into a classroom and do some direct consult and team teaching in math. Yeah. And it's a new teacher, and she feels, I think, a lot of pressure and stress over the looming state exams and scores and her children being behind. Well, everybody's kids are behind. We need to own that right now. And I'm trying to support her, but I'm just wondering if there's something more I should be doing to help her see that, you know, they're doing okay.
That's a great question. So I think there's sort of a short-term and a long-term approach to that. The short term is a little bit more difficult, I think, to really impact how somebody's feeling about that in a really quick way may be challenging, other than just support. And like I was talking about with students, being grateful for what is going well, expressing that to colleagues so that they feel that support, and it helps shift their own thinking to not take for granted the good that's happening. Mm-hmm. A longer term solution, I think, is what we're trying to do with the Positivity Project and with P2 for Educators in terms of helping shift the entire, you're shifting the entire culture. What I'm hoping that people start seeing, and what I've been trying to accomplish at my school, is that when we have conversations about academics and things like P2 or other social emotional concerns that we have as educators, it's not an either or conversation. It's a both and conversation. So if you have students that are not doing well, it doesn't mean, well, then you can't focus on things like P2, right? Because we just need to do academics. In my experience, and what I'm hoping to get more compelling proof for, is that actually it's the opposite. If we focus more on the social emotional well-being of those students and of those teachers that are having a difficult time, our results are actually going to get better. It's not an either or where you're giving up time. The analogy I used yesterday with my faculty is it's like investing money. When you invest money, you don't consider that you're giving that money away. You consider that you're temporarily releasing control of some of that money so that hopefully you get more back. And it's the same thing with time in terms of the Positivity Project. if you give a little bit of time to these topics, both for students and staff, it's an investment. It's not a waste. It's not letting go of time. You're investing time to get more back so that you enrich the quality of the remaining time that you have and get more out of it.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Good frame to great frame. These are striking. I chose the one that you see here. It says, every day we get to choose what lens we see the world with. It's our choice. So there's a couple really key points here. If you're going to do this presentation with your faculty or just as we're thinking our way through it. One is, he talks about these two images, and there was a whole series of images. There was the cowboy named Binky, and he moves them back into the shadows, and it's just a really striking image. This one happens to be my favorite. On a kind of concrete level in terms of his photography, he says he just waited 10 minutes, right? Like there was the image on the left, 10 minutes later, great frame, the image on the right. Our perspective taking may not be measured in terms of minutes. It's not like something's bad, so we wait 10 minutes and it's amazing. What I like to think in terms of his example is sometimes it's not that big of a shift. It's like the equivalent of waiting 10 minutes, where we can look at it one way and maybe we just shift it a little bit and the result is dramatically different. The other really key point to this quote that we spent quite a bit of time talking about yesterday at my school was the last few words, it's our choice. And that's something that people need to come to believe as a faculty and have your students believe through things like school-wide events like assemblies where you focus on topics like this. People have this choice to make in terms of how they see it. And we spent a lot of time today already talking about how our perception becomes our reality. But if viewed correctly, the fact that we have a choice should be empowering for people. People may be skeptical of it if they haven't experienced that, or they've been in a school culture where that's not part of the normal everyday conversation. It's understandably so. People are skeptical. But if you frame it in the right way, it's empowering to think that you have a choice. It's empowering for teachers to think, I have a choice in terms of how I view this class that's in front of me. The alternative is you don't have a choice. And that's very disempowering because it means you can't do anything to change your circumstances. So I spent some time yesterday, and it's a theme that I like to reinforce with people, that our ability to choose how we see things empowers us to do our best work. It kind of goes hand in glove with DeWitt Jones saying, celebrating what's right with the world gives us the energy to fix what's wrong. Anybody want to share any comments about the good frame, great frame? There was a longer section in the TED Talk with some really great images. I don't want to hold anybody back.
I will, Joe. It's Charity
Hi.
from McDonough. Hey, I guess I would challenge back with not just it's our choice, but it's my choice and it's our choice, right?
Yeah.
Because it's about choice and embracing that I do have the right to choose, but I'm framing it in a positive way to support the choice and helping us move toward our goal. So
Yeah,
that my
I like
choice
that.
buys into our choice.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a nice addition. Thanks for contributing. Anybody else?
Yeah, I
I
think,
guess, sorry.
no, go ahead. You go.
Jonathan from Traverse City, I guess I would add that in terms of, our culture and wanting to get better daily, we have that choice to either say, I'm good where we're at, and then, complacency potentially sets in, so on and so forth. But if you take these photo opportunities as an example, those photos in and of themselves are equally great, right? Like I think any novice or amateur photographer would say, wow, those, I would love to shoot either of those. But, here we have a National Geographic photographer who's at the top of his craft and saying, how could I make this better? right? So I think it's
Right.
having that opportunity to reflect both as adults in the building and as students in the building to say, what can I do to make this place better? But at the same point in time, it starts with us. It starts with the person that we look at in the mirror every day in terms of what can I do to make this better? Even though things are going well, I'm happy where we're
Right.
at. What can I do to make this better? So I think that, like you said, that choice is empowering, and it's good to have that as opposed to the alternative.
Absolutely. And you were talking about individuals looking in the mirror and saying, what can I do? And then one of the phenomenon that I like to think about and point out to people is the collective effort of that is how cultures improve, right? I mean, we, as school leaders, we like to think that we're impacting that potentially for people, but really what I would argue we need to be doing, and what P2 for Educators does, is have people, you're giving people awareness of topics like this DeWitt Jones TED Talk, or other items like James Clear and Atomic Habits, for example, which tied into what you were discussing. We're helping people as leaders have access and gain awareness so that they can have those sort of moments on their own. And then the collective nature of that shifts your entire school culture. It's really not different. Thanks for that. Was there something else too, or?
Well, I was just gonna say, when you talk about it's my choice, I think for me lately, it feels like I have less of my choice. I have more of people directing maybe
Yeah.
what I have to think even, or what I have to do. And that can be frustrating. So I was very encouraged that, yeah, we need to speak up, stay positive about it, but let our voices be heard, because for the greater good, maybe we're the one that needs to stand up and say something.
Well, and it's, there's so many schools across the country, and all schools have a unique culture, just like we all have individually unique personalities. So it's hard to know where people are coming from when I hear you say that. But really, I think what another way of considering that would be, of course, there are things that we don't have a choice about, right? I work in New York State. There are lots of mandates. I take testing. There are lots of things that I don't really have a choice over. So it's not that we get to choose our own adventure, so to speak, but we always get to choose how we view what's in front of us. What's in front of us might not be our choice, right? Like the puffballs wasn't the choice, but what he did with that and how he viewed it was in his sort of sense of agency. He could control that. So I think that's a subtle distinction, but that's what I would encourage people to be thinking about. It's not that you can choose what's in front of you. It's actually completely the opposite. But you can choose how you view it, and then that can affect in a very real way what you then do. I hope that makes sense. So at the end, he talks about the magic juice camera. For those of you who watched the TED Talk, the little boy had the camera, and he talks about that being a touchstone. He was sort of having a bad day, and then, at the end of the story, when the young boy just says, "Does your camera have juice in it?" And it's a silly story, but for him, it's a great touchstone that reminds him of looking for the good. It was a bad day, and this boy seemed to naturally be able to just do that. He was living in a place that was much more in touch with that lens of celebration, as DeWitt calls it. So I'm not going to ask people to do this now over Zoom, but if you were doing this presentation with a group, or if you're thinking through it on your own on your drive home, I would ask you to just reflect for yourself and think back to either a student or a situation with a colleague, or whatever it is for you that acts as that touchstone. Very much in the same way that we talked about the photo of the puffball is a great touchstone to sort of instantly remind you of these concepts. So too are memories that you have in the past, where you have felt like you were either able to put these ideas into practice, or you showed up for a student in a way that really altered his or her life. I hope you do have those things that you can think back on and remember, because all of these skills and these perspective taking skills that we're talking about are like a musculature. You can get better at it through practice. It's a growth mindset. It's like an Atomic Habits 1% better every day type of situation where it's not an insight that you have and then it instantly stays with you and suddenly, you see the beautiful light through the puffball everywhere you look. It's a practice. So it's something that you can get better at. It doesn't matter where you're starting. It's something that over time, if given the right attention, you can improve on, and it can change the way you see things and in turn change the way you handle the situations in your life. Every P2 for Educators presentation ends in very much the same way, and we call it the P2E process. And it's a 3-step process of building awareness, establishing actionable items, and then applying with frequency and consistency. The presentations themselves or school-wide events like assemblies based on Positivity Project or P2 lessons between teachers and students, those are all things that build awareness. And that level is wonderful and it can help change a school culture. But to really go from good frame to great frame, to borrow DeWitt Jones's terminology, people need to establish items that they can take action on. And then those items need to be applied frequently and consistently. It can't be a one and done type of thing. It can't be we had this great speaker come in September and then I don't know why no one talked about it in June. It can't be that. So I really focus on establishing actionable items with teachers, and actionable is a little bit of a buzzword, but it's an important word because it just means doable. It means something that can be done. And so what I encourage people to do is pick an item based on the topic that we've gone over that's completely able to be done by them. They don't need permission. It's not going to get them in trouble. They don't need a budget. They don't need to ask their principal for resources, or the principal doesn't need to ask the superintendent. It's something that you can do. It can be very, very small. But oftentimes we leave conversations like this or a great professional development opportunity and we're pumped up and we're motivated. But if we don't have something to put into action, we lose it. So I'd really encourage you to focus with your teachers or with your colleagues or even your students on that item. And then if it is a small doable item, it's easier to apply it with frequency and consistency. If you come up with this amazing, grandiose idea that's going to take a planning committee and a budget and time, those are good. We need those, but you can't do that frequently and consistently. And it's the frequency and consistency that actually leads to change. So that's how I always end a P2 for Educators presentation. And I would encourage you to kind of take that on for yourself. At this point, I'd be happy to answer any questions about the presentation that we just had or P2 for Educators in general, because like I said at the beginning, it's sort of a twofold presentation on both topics.
Joe, I think one question or comment, if you will, that would be really helpful is, I know through talking to a lot of the schools just through my position as the school success coordinator for P2 is sort of how do we incorporate it? There's many ways to incorporate P2 for Educators. So could you just touch upon how you first started it with the volunteering and how you first started implementing it?
Yeah, so there are a variety of ways, and I've been trying to think of ways to sort of reduce friction for people and make it easier to incorporate into the busy lives of schools. Last year, we have sort of in-house professional development in my district, and people can sign up to do in-service courses throughout the school year and get credit that ends up impacting their salary or their graduate hours. So I ran a 10-session series last year with all of the P2 for Educators presentations that we spaced them out. So it sort of went all through the year. I had, I think, about 35 to 40 participants. And we have maybe about 115 teachers. So that was pretty good. Though those sessions were all in person, they were longer sessions. So you could really take a presentation like this. You could watch the video together. You could do small group discussion, have people talk and share out. So that could last, an hour and a half or longer. People don't have that flexibility in faculty meetings. So what I've done for my faculty meetings is sometimes I will just take, like most of these P2 for Educators presentations have videos. This one's the longest by far. Most of them are like 2 to 4 minutes long. And I'll just show the video and put up one slide with a couple questions and use it just as a way to introduce the faculty meeting, get people kind of focused on that type of topic. And it can be like 8 minutes. It doesn't have to be long. If you show a 3-minute video, you ask a couple questions, people talk in small groups, share out, and you recap, you can accomplish a lot in a small amount of time. And I would point out that that type of practice is very similar to what we just talked about with the P2E process. It's frequent, you're doing it with frequency and consistency. So you need these larger opportunities like we're doing today, but you have to keep it in front of people. Like I said, it's a musculature, you're building it up. If you don't practice it, if you don't put some time into it, it atrophies and people lose that lens, or people lose that feeling about what it is that defines our school culture. So in short, basically, we can sort of shorten it down. I'd like to try to work maybe to make that more readily available, sort of like a mini P2 for Educators, so people could use those in faculty meetings.
Thank you, Joe.
Yeah, absolutely. I really appreciate everybody's time. I know it's very busy in the middle of a school day.
We had an overall question. Does anyone budget in celebration recognition stuff for their building budget? What might you be purchasing or giving as recognition? I don't know if you want to touch upon that, Joe, or if anyone else wants to jump in.
Yeah, we do not do that. We do some things to recognize each other. On the P2 blog, there's a piece about sharing gratitude, and every November we do little gratitude cards where colleagues share those with one another. So I try to find things that are connected to the Positivity Project that helps the adults sort of use it in a more hands-on way with each other, and find that to be really effective.
I'll chime in with something that we do. So we have a new accounting measure in the state of Michigan started, I think, at the beginning of last year, where you can't spend money on something that's not attached to an agenda or a PD, and it's just, it makes it really difficult to buy those certain types of things. So I actually had a staff member do this in my previous building, and I brought it here. But so we just have a bunch of rocks, right? Just a normal rock, actually took out of a lake, cleaned them up, spray painted them green, and then we just wrote the character strength on a rock. So there's multiple character strengths floating around our building. So we had these laying out at the beginning of the staff meeting, and just encourage everybody to take one. And then prior to them leaving the staff meeting, we gave them the charge of finding that character strength in our building from some other staff member, and then giving that to that staff member. And then so when you get it, you add your initial to it, and then you then have to go pass it on. So super cheap. Pretty impactful because it's coming from your peer, but it's something that just the adults do. So we have different things for kids, but this is something that we can do with the adults, and it's attached to P2 as well.
That's a great idea.
I love that rock idea, Jonathan, when you showed us that when we visited. Like you said, it's very attainable. You could go searching for rocks with the students if you wanted to. We had someone else from Farnsworth Middle School saying they're doing assemblies, which I know you touched a little bit upon, Joe, with the student t-shirt design contest. That's a fun way to do it.
Yeah.
I think Tony had a question. Tony, do you want to pop in and let us know your question?
Yes, thank you.
Mhm.
So we were actually just talking about some of this yesterday. Kids came back today. We had a staff day yesterday. Everybody's got so much going on at all school. Oh, sorry, by the way, I'm school counselor. I'm at Endeavor Charter School in North Carolina, Wake Forest, North Carolina. We've been trying to figure out, I don't want to say buy-in because it's not something that we need to worry about buying in. I mean, this is obviously P2 is great. We love it. We incorporate it into our classes every day. We incorporate it into our announcements. But we're trying to figure out, I guess buy-in is the best phrase to use, but like more teacher buy-in and more kid buy-in, so that it's not just something else we have to do with them. It's not just something else that's on our list of, testing and curriculum and this and that and blah, blah. We're trying to really figure out how to incorporate it more so that they are excited about it and they want to, that they buy into it. And we were kind of throwing around an idea of, looking at some data possibly, and like highlighting a student from, we're a K-8 school, highlighting a student from elementary, highlighting a student from the middle school part, and highlighting a staff member. That's kind of where we stopped having ideas. We were trying to figure out how to make that work. And I'm seeing, I've been hearing and seeing some ideas that you guys do in your schools, but I was just trying to, P2 is new to me. So this is new to me. We've been doing it here for a while, but I'm newer to this school. So it's a lot of information, but
Absolutely.
just trying to figure it out.
The number one thing that I found to be effective in my school are school-wide events, having assemblies. I do an opening assembly every year. This is my 5th year in the middle school. I was an elementary principal for 8 years before that. But since I've been in the middle school, in the first week of school, we have a big opening assembly. We go out, we take the whole middle school outside onto the football field and do an aerial photograph in some sort of P2 symbol, or, we've done like the shield, we've done P2, we've done OPM for other people mindset. And that gets kids excited right off the bat. And then we have essentially quarterly assemblies where we recognize students for exemplifying character strengths or other people mindset. And my experience with those assemblies is that I find it to be equally impactful for faculty as well as students. It's a physical demonstration of we're all together doing the same thing. We're building our culture. This is who we are. We're forming identity through our actions. And they're just frequent enough where it helps that musculature that I was talking about, where, maybe after 8 or 9 weeks, some of that enthusiasm's wearing off, and it helps bring everybody back together. And it's a great reminder. But they're long enough apart where it doesn't interfere too dramatically with all of the competing needs and all the things that we have to do. So I would really encourage people to do that. I think P2 is going to be sharing some assemblies in the near future, just for ideas for people to get started. And it helps tie everything together.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Hi, I'm Janet from Cook Elementary at Austin, Texas. In my school, what we do is we have a student of the week. And every Friday we have a virtual assembly, and the students in each classroom nominate a student as the student of the week based on the P2 character that they've been learning throughout the week. And that student that is nominated receives a certificate, and we do that every week at the end of the semester. We do have an assembly, and we actually also have an award ceremony, and parents are invited. So we celebrate all those students each semester with, it's a big celebration. So that's something that we've been doing for a long time, like 2 years now. And the students and teachers also get very excited about, the student of the week, and celebrating the students. I think is the best way to do it.
That's great.
To sort of piggyback off of that idea, Jeanette, and thank you for sharing. I recently visited a school where the students were given the opportunity to nominate a staff member who showed the positivity, the character strengths, which I thought was really powerful, because, we're always so focused on how do we recognize the students, and just to go with P2E or P2 for educators, it's very nice to see sort of that flipped perspective, if you will, of, the students recognizing one of their staff members for showing or exemplifying a strength. I have lots of great ideas being put into the chat, which are amazing. We appreciate everyone sort of sharing in there. Does anyone else have any last questions for Joe? I see Brooke, do you have your hand up?
you. We're here in Ogdensburg in a room. There's several of us here.
Lovely.
One of the things that was really important to me as a building principal, I'm not in that position any longer, but so one of the things that really struck me was we used to do student of the month from each classroom, and prior to P2, and the big takeaway I had with P2 was that we need to teach children that they each have strengths. And sometimes when we only recognize certain students and make that the bigger deal, it diminishes the underlying idea that we all have strengths. And so one of the in the building that I used to work in, I required every student get recognized for a strength. Maybe not that they're the strongest with that, because we all know that there are often students that we kind of have to dig a little to find their strength. Maybe it's not quite as obvious, but that the teachers really convey that message to the children that we all have strengths, and it's not just those students that get recognized at assemblies, which is great. And we did that as well. But the way that we had set it up was that every student would get acknowledged for a character strength by the end of the year. And that stemmed from a student saying to me, as they left one of our assemblies before we started, that was, I've gone to school here since kindergarten, and it was their last assembly as a 6th grader leaving, and he said, I've never been student of the month. And it really, it just left me thinking, this child thinks that he has no strengths at all, or that, that there's nothing great about him that deserves to be recognized. And so sharing that with the staff, we had a big talk about how do we handle that moving forward. I don't want any child thinking that that there isn't something positive about them and that they don't have these strengths. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there, just in thinking about ways to maybe not have it be as much focused on who is the best at having an open mind, to more, okay, look introspectively at what are your strengths, and thinking about children, getting kids to think that way, as well as the teachers. So just wanted to throw that out there.
That's a very good point, and we actually thought about it, and a way that teachers came out to kind of take care of those situations was asking the students, about, okay, it's almost the end of the school year, and who hasn't had the opportunity to get recognized for a skill. And then it was actually brought back to the students, and the students were like, oh, Pablo didn't get a certificate, for the last 4 weeks or whatever. So actually the kids were the ones that were in charge of making sure that everybody will get a certificate in their class, and which I thought it was very powerful.
Yeah. Those are great insights. We found that just recognizing the character strengths and the other people mindset, it just organically finds a whole wider sort of cast of characters in our student body. Because if you're getting recognized for zest and enthusiasm, that could look a lot of different ways, and it might not typically fit like a student of the quarter in a traditional sense. So I think that's a wonderful thing to be mindful of. And I feel like the character strengths and other people mindset really lend themselves to naturally doing that in a really authentic way for our students to learn more about themselves.
Absolutely. I love all this conversation happening. And we appreciate you all taking the time. We are coming up at 1 o'clock. We said it would be 12 to 1, so I want to respect time. But again, if anybody has any last minute questions, this is wonderful to have this platform to be able to network with each other. So feel free to jump in.
Yeah, or if people have individual questions, I'm happy to answer emails or anything. If people could probably send those to P2, because I don't have my email on the screen. But.
Yeah. Melissa, do you want to put our emails in the chat for us? She also did put in the the TED Talk, so you can
Okay.
access that if you'd like to. It's also in the calendar invite. There's a link to it as well. If you haven't seen it yet, please watch it. It's really inspiring and comical. And Joe, we thank you so much for taking the time to do that.
Totally.
Especially, you know, with the raspy voice from being sick. We appreciate you persevering through. And everyone, thank you so much for coming. This is really a wonderful opportunity. It's so great to see all the different educators connecting and sharing openly and vulnerably too. So we really appreciate it. Melissa has our emails in the chat for you. We're the school success coordinators for all regions of the US. So please feel free to reach out and we can connect you with Joe if needed or necessary. So thank you so much.
Yes, thank you, everybody.
Yeah, have a wonderful rest of your week and hopefully the new year is off to a wonderful start.
Yes.